the Yoga and Meditation Society of SUNY Oneonta. My name is Dr. Ashok Malhotra. I'm a professor of philosophy at SUNY Oneonta. I'm also the chair of the Yoga Society. Our Yoga Society is funded by a grant from the Meta-Nexus Institute of Philadelphia and also by SUNY Oneonta. Today, we are going to have a wonderful discussion with a famous physicist whose name is Dr. Raman. He is a professor emeritus from Rochester Institute of Technology. He is going to speak to us or have a dialogue with us on a very important topic, that is science, religion, reflections of a Hindu scientist, humanist. And I'm very delighted that you're with us, Dr. Raman. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah.
And we'll have a wonderful dialogue. And we also have Dr. Douglas Schrader, who is a distinguished teaching professor at SUNY Oneonta, and also he's the chair of the philosophy department. I'm delighted that you're here. So I think we'll have a nice conversation here. One of the things which has been brought to the public notice is this kind of clash, dialogue, some kind of reflections, interface between science and religion. Since you have had background in both religion, you're brought up as a Hindu in India, and you have studied their philosophy, their worldviews, but at the same time, your educational training has been in the physical sciences, mathematical sciences. How do you see this controversy, and what's the root of this controversy? Tell us something historically, summarize it for us. What is the root?
Well, it seems to me that if you look at it historically, prior to the so-called Copernican revolution in Western Europe in the 15th, 16th centuries, there was really no conflict in the sense that most of the thinkers in most cultures who were scientifically inclined, inquisitive, trying to explain the world, astronomers and so on, were equally religious, deeply religious people also of the tradition. The first confrontation, so-called, occurred as a result of the Copernican revolution in a peculiar way, that it somehow displaced, as you know, humanity and our habitat, the earth, from the center of the universe, which is the traditional religious perspective. But that was the starting point in the Western tradition at least. But over the centuries, there have been several confrontations and reconciliations, of course. But in the early, jumping now to the 20th century, after the so-called warfare era, as one says, in the 19th century between science and religion, there were efforts, especially in the about 50 years ago, by responsible scientists and religious people to bring about some reconciliation, building bridges, and that was going on reasonably well with organizations like the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, IRIS, and the work of Ian Barber and others.
Right.
But only of late, this has become somewhat unpleasant in a way. It has reverted back to the confrontational phase.
Why do you think that's the case? Why it has reverted back? Because if we go back to 1905, when Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, came up with the formula E is equal to mc square, Einstein is represented as saying that he was trying to understand the mind of God. And if he could understand the mind of God, everything else has irrelevant details. So he's showing that through the discovery of theory of relativity as a scientist, he still had some kind of faith, some kind of belief in God. And Einstein is revered by people as more like a sage of the sciences. And the scientists of the past were also revered as some very important people. Why in the 20th century, the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, we have this kind of problem?
Well, in order to, it's a very important, interesting observation, but we need to look into the cultural context when this happens. This kind of a confrontation, for example, is not as severe in some parts of the world, certainly not yet, let's say, in India or in Europe. It is, to some extent, a largely American phenomenon at this point. And I would say that there are at least two, there are many, many complex reasons for this, but at least two. One of them is that after the change, after the 1980s, especially 70s, 80s, there have been significant changes in the mores and values and lifestyles and so on in the public at large, and the guardians of traditional morality have often, rightly or wrongly, interpreted all these as arising from a scientific worldview which sees no difference between man and beast in a way except for the number of chromosomes, for example. And once we begin to look upon human beings in those terms, so argue certain people, we are diminishing the human condition as something special, and as a result, it unleashes forces in society, overtly or subtly, which enable people to move away from traditional morality and injunctions such as of the Ten Commandments in this case and so on. So that gives a general fear, gives rise to a general fear in the hearts of many, and that's one of the reasons, it seems to me. The other, to some extent, is, as I see it, is from the writings of many eminent, eloquent and competent scientists who have emphasized the negative aspects of religion, and thereby also made this a more antagonistic and confrontational kind of situation rather than one in which we will try to seek some, if not complete understanding, at least a respectful, mutually respectful living together of science and religion.
It's interesting that you talk about at least a perceived connection between a scientific worldview and a decrease in moral values, a decrease in the sense of human dignity and worth and so on. Because this is exactly the situation that obtained during the time of the Catholic Church's censure of Galileo. The Copernican worldview particularly was blamed for people not attending services, for an increase in crime and so on. And while the Catholic Church sanctioned that scientists such as Galileo could go ahead and continue to investigate the theory, what they forbid was that he could teach it as the true perspective in terms of the way the world really was. Now, pretty much everyone, including the Catholic Church, has backed away from that and said we went too far. What, in your view, is the connection between the scientific worldview, whether we're talking 300 years ago or 400 years ago or today, and the way in which we as human beings orient ourselves within the world? Is there a true cause and effect relationship, or is it perhaps simply the case that people are overreacting to things that have other causes?
I think, frankly, that there is no cause and effect relationship in the sense of epistemologically or culturally justified reason to say that a scientific understanding of the world should necessarily diminish the human condition. Quite the contrary. It seems to me that the sheer range and depth of understanding about the physical universe that science has been able to accomplish should enhance the human spirit much more rather than diminish it. But then we need to have a very profound and a deeper understanding of what science is all about. Sadly, in most societies, including our own here, the results of science are taught in schools and colleges much more than its humanistic aspects and its methodologies and its worldviews, which are really amongst the greatest in the history of human intellectual quest. And therefore, this perception has given rise to that. There is no question about that. But equally, as I said, many professional scientists, or a number of eloquent professional scientists, have been less than respectful in some of their writings in recent decades about religion as such, pointing to or emphasizing its many unquestionably destructive and harmful effects on human history. But there is a lot more to religion than those. And it is unfortunate, it seems to me, that by overemphasizing these, they have added to the antipathy that the average person, uninformed or ill-informed about science, feels about science.
Follow that point a little bit further. You said earlier that this kind of disrespect towards religion is some other kind of cultural phenomenon. There's more of it in America, but less in Europe, and also very little in India. Could you say something about the fact that the Indian philosophers provided a wonderful vision of a human being, and science only picks up a part of that vision? So you're brought up as a Hindu, but your education has been in the sciences. Can you relate this, how in India people look at the relationship between science and religion, and how in your own personal life and professional life you have been able to reconcile these two perspectives and be a very effective teacher, very effective human being, very effective parent, and so forth?
Well, let me add right away one thing. What I said, in fact, what you said about in the Hindu-Indian context, this conflict hasn't arisen, is very valid, or was valid to some extent. Let us say for a few decades in America also, science was held in the highest regard by the public at large. Soon, especially as you know, after the Sputnik project and so on, they were regarded as pampered citizens, as it were. Therefore, these have a lot to do with the cultural changes that occur. And but coming back to India, it seems to me that the Hindu religion now has, in a way, a tremendous advantage in this context, and that is that the religion is more an experiential aspect of being human than an analytical and intellectual aspect. In other words, in the Hindu world, one can afford to be a practicing member of the faith by simply participating in the various, ranging all the way from meditation and yoga to the feasts and the festivals and so on, and one does not talk about the explanation of the physical world. And this makes a very important difference, what Gould called NOMA, the non-overlapping magisteria. Now, we have been practicing that for a long time, and the Hindu philosophers have clearly distinguished from the ancient times knowledge that is of this world, which you gain through analytical modes and so on, and the knowledge of beyond, or the para and the apara, distinction, as you know. And that enables many practicing Hindus to be scientists, no less, and they are able to somehow compartmentalize this, which is very difficult in certain other traditions, where there is a very strong emphasis on theology, which is a rational interpretation of religion. And this has its own merits, of course, but that can lead to confrontations, which we have not. However, I must add that should there be a context in India where, such as happened some few years ago, where one brings in explanatory aspects in science. What we are witnessing here, the equivalent is in India when they wanted to teach astrology in school science courses. Right. The same kind of confrontation occurred there also. And so those are some of the parallels. And
Okay. Could you say something about what can we learn in America from the Indian experience?
what we can learn here is to respect religion, and I'm now talking we in the sense of the scientific minded, to respect religion as a very important and necessary dimension of being human. And by religion, it's so difficult to define these terms, and there are 100 different meanings, but it is a kind of longing to connect with the unknown, a sense of mystery and reverence for the universe. And it is in fact that sense, experience of that sense of mystery that constitutes the deep religious experience much more than the answers we have to the mysteries. And to recognize that and get along with life and emphasize more the aesthetic and the ethical aspects rather than the explanatory aspects of religion is what constitutes, I think, true religion, and leave the explanations to science.
The way you're presenting, the religious quest or the goal of religion to have that kind of connection between myself and that mysterious one out there, or to reveal the mystery and feel that connection. I think some of the very deep scientists have the same kind of approach to nature itself. Like I mentioned earlier about Einstein, that for him to discover those basic laws of the universe is to discover the thinking of God, or that mystery will be revealed through science. So religion is trying to reveal that mystery through experience. Science is trying to reveal that mystery through mathematical calculations or rational kind of information and so forth. So what is the difference then? Why is the clash?
Absolutely. The clash often comes from the historical impacts, I would say, in the United States in particular, a nation which grew from immigrants who were persecuted at one time in Europe. There is a gut reaction against whatever is called institutionalized religion, and therefore those things make it difficult for people to accept any kind of, and we have all the separation of church and state, which are all built in mainly to safeguard against the authoritarian power that traditional religions had. And now any talk of religion immediately brings to mind almost unconsciously such possibilities, which is one reason, it seems to me as an observer, why many people of science and other liberal thinkers are concerned about encroachments, and probably you would add to that.
I think you've described very accurately the sort of thing that leads us into the public forum, for example, at the present time with the idea known as intelligent design, and the belief by some people that it should be taught as science within the schools. And I know this is being considered by a number of courts. What is your perspective on that issue?
On the one hand, I do believe that it has absolutely no place in a course in science, because if we are to respect the views of the scientific establishment, which consists not of people with different opinions, but of people who have worked hard in the pursuit of a particular domain of scientific knowledge and contributed to it, they have unquestioningly and without exception declared that this has no place in science. And it seems to me that it is certainly not part of science. On the other hand, I also feel that if we are to look at the wonder and splendor and the magnificence of nature and simply exclaim, my goodness, all this beauty and joy that is created, it looks as if somebody really planned it or designed it. If you say it in a poetic, metaphorical, and truly human way, I don't think that is necessarily anything antagonistic to science. Rather, it establishes the humanity of science. And I see no harm in a professor, and one can say that not necessarily with respect to a butterfly, but even to the planetary system or the galactic grandeur. One can always be impressed and exclaim in that way, and that makes us even more human, it seems to me. Unfortunately, all this is enmeshed in political and other contexts, which really sours the whole appreciation of both science and religion, in my view.
What's actually your understanding of intelligence design? Most of the people talk about it and they're not clear about it. So you're a scientist. From your point of view, how will you give a nice picture of, in simple words, what it is all about?
Okay, the notion of intelligent design is not anything new in a sense. After all, if you go back to in the Western tradition, the Abrahamic tradition, the creation in 6 days is basically intelligent design, one could say in that sense. Right. But in the late 18th, early 19th century, the controversy or the idea that was proposed by Paley and others was that if you go walk on a beach, let us say, and you saw a vase, you would say, if you just saw a mound of sand, you just walk past it. But if you saw a beautiful vase, you would say, hey, somebody must have made this. Mm-hmm. And so they were saying that likewise, given that the universe is made up of well-defined laws, mathematically precise laws, and all the beautiful orbits of planets and so on, it could not have happened by chance. So that is the origin, in a way, in a modern scientific context of that. So basically, intelligent design is not a new idea, but of course with Darwin and others, we know that many of these things can be adequately explained and understood in terms of the laws of nature. But in recent years, as you know, some biologists, people with credentials in biology, after looking into some of the very intricate and complex lacunae, if you will, in Darwinian theory, have proposed that because they cannot be explained, certain things at the subnuclear, subcellular level, that could have only happened by some kind of a design. To me, this seems somewhat simplistic in that in the development of any scientific theory, there are always unsolved problems, and that is what keeps scientific research alive. And this is in the nature of scientific knowledge. Just because we can't explain something to say that therefore it must have happened by intelligent design is not the most scientific way. In essence, that's all that they say.
Right, and in order for that to be a scientific hypothesis, there would have to be testable consequences to that hypothesis as opposed to some other as to how this had come about in that sort of way.
Absolutely.
Otherwise becomes what we call an ad hoc
Exactly,
hypothesis.
Because either it must be able to explain as an unexplained phenomena, right, or it must be able to predict as an unobserved phenomena, neither of which this particular theory seems to be doing, and therefore, as somebody the famous physicist once said about a physics theory, it is not even wrong.
doesn't get that far, right? Yes.
So let's get back to, I again get back to the same question. You're brought up in the Hindu tradition. You had understood the philosophies of India, various philosophies. You understand the culture of India. You also have been able to get education in the Western modern science. And how, as a person, as a professional, you're able to reconcile these two in your being, maybe that could become a model for scientists as well as religious people to start talking to each other and have a fruitful, constructive dialogue.
Well, thank you, but I won't presume that much.
A couple of minutes, okay?
I will simply say that personally, I'm very happy to have been brought up in the Hindu tradition, which enables me every day to do a little bit of serious meditation, which enriches me during the day and in the confrontation of life's many problems. And I have been able to appreciate the world much better as a result of the scientific worldviews, which has given me a deeper understanding and a fuller appreciation of the complexity of the physical universe in which we live. But I have also always experienced that mystery, which is what has been instilled in me as a result of the Hindu upbringing, I suppose. And as I contemplate or meditate on this magnificent universe, I can only recognize my own finiteness and the finiteness of the human mind in trying to grasp this. And it is that sense of humility, I suppose, which enables me to appreciate what others feel about these fundamental issues. And what matters, therefore, is not so much what we believe in, but in how best we can use that belief for the betterment of fellow humans and society. God knows the world is facing enormously complex problems today, and we need to get along with those.
Well, I think what you're really getting at is that science had made so much progress, and its results can be seen through technology, but science has only given us a verifiable picture of the universe, and that picture is very tiny. Whereas there's much more to this universe. There's excitement, there's art there, there's an aesthetic experience, there's mystery out there. And so scientists should be humble people, that their discoveries are good, they make us live a slightly better life, maybe quantitatively, maybe a little bit qualitatively better life. But there are many other domains which add to the information, the knowledge, the wisdom which we want to gain about the universe. And so scientists should not be egotistical. And a lot of them are not egotistical. It's just like in religion, we have certain egotistical groups and they become terrorists. In the science, I think they also terrorize us when they say that we have the truth. You don't have the truth. So what you're saying is that scientists should open themselves up to other disciplines and see what other people are telling us. So this dialogue, this conversation should continue, and they should be respectful to each other.
Absolutely. And I think there are a great many, probably the majority of scientists share those views exactly as you articulated. And because scientists are by and large humble with respect to what we know and what is yet to be known. And but those aspects of scientists don't come through in the popular writings, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a
this
line
in the last minute, so let's summarize.
There's a line in the opening chapter of David Hume's Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Be a philosopher, but amidst all your philosophy, be still a man. And I often tell students in my philosophy of science class that the chemist who has forgotten how to enjoy a piece of dark chocolate or a glass of fine wine, or the biologist who cannot chase a butterfly with his children and laugh at the movements of the butterfly, has lost something of humanity in the process. And I think that's part of what you're bringing us back to, so thank you.
I think it's wonderful. You have given us your view, and I think maybe here you are a scientist and we are philosophers, and maybe if we had a theologian, we could all be sitting on Waikiki Beach watching a beautiful sunset, admiring it as human beings. But the world is much more than looking at all these colors to figure it out why the sunset is created, just to look at it and enjoy it. And I think that's where a wonderful dialogue could take place. Thank you very much.
Well, thank
really
you.
Appreciate
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Very enjoyable.
Doug?
Thank you.
Yep. In the time